What's up everybody, Adam here with another video. Today I thought I'd do something a little different. I'm here in my studio in Old Quebec City, and this is new for me, living in a place like this. It's technically a condo, which I hate saying that word. Feels more like a cabin. Actually, that's my Murphy bed behind me there, and those are the logs left over from my cabin. And you know, it's got a vibe. It's got a cabin vibe. There's my paddle behind me there. And anyways, this is new for me. For the last 10 years, I've lived in a combination of cabins, one of which, of course, I built myself. I've lived in a bush shelter. I lived in tents, of course, and then my van. So I want to just give you a background story about all that and, you know, give you some inspiration if you're looking for it. Give you a laugh if you can't believe it, especially the shelter thing. We'll get to that one. Or, you know, just if you're interested in anything for cabin ideas or outdoor living, you know, this will show you what's possible and give you some ideas for that too. So, you know, one thing I've come to learn, like the reason I'm here right now in this studio is, you know, I'm kind of regrouping in this place before I buy land and build a house. Some of you know that follow me that I'm looking for land right now, and that's still underway, and I plan to build a little log house, which would be great. So in order to like go from the life I just had to that, this is perfect because now I have gear. I've got electronics like for music and stuff. And when I moved into my cabin, all of my belongings like books and clothes were in Rubbermaid bins under tarps. Won't be doing that again. I learned a ton living this way. And you know, this is a perfect like middle ground for me right now. It's nothing too fancy, but it's cozy and it's mine. So this is it for now. So without further ado, let's jump in to the stories of the cabins, the shelters, the vans. Let's go. So how did I get into all this in general, like the outdoor stuff? Well, I started off camping, like backcountry camping. The pictures you're seeing now are of me from Algonquin Park over 10 years ago, probably 15 years ago now, maybe more. I went on my first solo trip like in my early 20s, and after that I got hooked. And I kind of got the call of the wild thing going on big time. And that was kind of the seed that was planted in the backcountry trips. I felt the solitude. I got very connected to the natural world in a way that I didn't get before I grew up in the suburbs. And then I moved to the big city, you know. But camping while I was at school and stuff really opened my eyes to what's out there. So that's what started it off and got me comfortable on like at a basic level. But then about 10 years ago is when it really all started. So about 10 years ago, I decided to leave my job in Toronto. I had a couple jobs. I'm a musician, so I was like playing at nice restaurants and teaching people how to play guitar and stuff. And I just said, no, I'm leaving, bye. And I left my place, left everything, and I started traveling across Canada. So I worked in Algonquin Park, taught guitar to kids camp, and then I lived out in BC, a little cabin there, which I don't have pictures of. Just a note before we get too far into this, some places I don't have too many pictures of, because this point in my life, I wasn't too concerned about taking any pictures at all. As you'll probably gather from these, I'll give you my best ones, but I wasn't YouTubing any of this. I wasn't posting any of this online. I wanted to get away from all that stuff. So, you know, what I have is what you're getting. So I went out to BC, lived in a cabin there. Went out to Saskatchewan, lived with a couple of homesteaders at their farmhouse, out on the prairies, amazing. And I did all this through workaway.com. You know, I lived at these places for free and I ate for free and they didn't pay me. So it was like a work exchange sort of thing. Anyways, this brings me to the first real like outdoor living prolonged experience I had, which was in the Northwest Territories. So I worked at a lodge out in the Northwest Territories, the far north of Canada, still in the tree line. And I shared a cabin or a canvas wall tent. So this was like a, you know, basic frame with some insulation in there and canvas as the walls with a wood stove inside. I shared this with 3 other guys and it was kind of gross. And it was either too hot or too cold in there. There was no middle ground really in that thing. I did this for an entire winter when it plunged down to -40, -50, but it was an amazing experience. And you know, that got me like comfortable with the whole thing. I could have done without the roommates, but you know, it was still my first like real experience with it. And like our bathroom was an outhouse half the time. The other half it was at the main lodge. So we were out there doing it. And after that, I left that lodge and I did some house sitting at a off-grid houseboat in Yellowknife in the Northwest Territories. There's a community of houseboats there. The ice freezes the lake. All these people are in their houseboats on the lake, and it freezes around these houseboats. And the pictures you're seeing are these houseboats. Some are just like a house built on a barge. And people just like drive beside their houseboat and park beside it and use their car drive to town on the ice. It's just a normal thing there. So I stayed in one of these for 3 weeks, a month, something like that. And that's when I got my first experience with solar power and my first experience with a composting toilet, which was basically, you know, a bucket with a garbage bag. And you pour peat moss in when you're done. And then when it fills up, you throw it outside, it freezes solid, and then you take that solid ball to the dump. Just, this is too much information, but that was life. That's life on the houseboats, off-grid. You can't just go to the bathroom in the lake. That's gross. So you do it that way. And one of my fond memories from that houseboat is throwing that ice ball in a garbage bag into the dump before I left. But anyways, I was on this houseboat and I learned how to use solar. I was, you know, managing the wood pile. I was doing all this on my own. So this was a couple weeks worth or, you know, 3 weeks worth, something like that. And that was really an amazing experience in the dead of winter when it was, you know, very cold. It gets freezing up there. So this was like part one. Then, because I was inspired and I'd done a few things, I wanted to take my, you know, passion to another level. And I decided to do a primitive skills apprenticeship at a place called Sticks and Stones Wilderness School in Ontario. And so I went there, I moved there. And the idea with this program was you got to build your own shelter, live in it for like the whole time, and then you leave. And then, you know, during the time that you're there, there's courses that I took, you know, on bow building, friction fire, all that sort of stuff. But it took me about 3 months. I lived in my tent while I built this shelter. Once the shelter was built, I moved into it. It was a bunch of dead wood, made the frame. And then you need about like this much insulation thick to actually make it waterproof. So it took me a few months to get that. You know, there was a bit of drips in the beginning, but I eventually got it waterproof. And yeah, I was in there for like 4 months. And my first night in there was pretty scary because, you know, I put some blankets down in there and I brought a sleeping bag inside and then had a Rubbermaid bin of my stuff and that was it. But while I was at this property, of course, you know, there was a main barn at the front of the property and it was 100 acres. So I was at the very back of the 100 acres and the barn was at the very front and that's where the fridge was and stuff. So, you know, I had that luckily. Everything else was like outhouse and I lived in the shelter and all that. That took my nature connection to kind of a really deep level. You know, some people interact with nature on a superficial level where they just kind of go on a walk in the park and they like it and that's fine, they still appreciate it. And then some people do recreational stuff like trail running or camping and gets them a bit more connected. When you do something like you live in a shelter, that takes everything to a crazy deep level and your intuition gets heightened. My neighbors were now the squirrels and the chipmunks and the coyotes, and I felt more connected to them than, you know, than the rural neighbors that I had out there, which weren't too many. So it was an amazing experience. The wildlife got super close to the shelter. One night a great horned owl landed on a branch right above my head, and I didn't realize how loud they were because I never heard them standing right beside them. Or in my case, I was lying down on my back. And this thing hooted a few times and I could feel the whole vibration go through my body because it was so loud. Deer tracks right out front of my shelter door. When you're in a shelter, you are totally camouflaged. You know, things get close to you. Coyotes got very close and howled right near me, you know. But living in the shelter day to day you got used to it, you know. I had the best sleeps of my life in that shelter, believe it or not. I was warm enough with the blankets and the sleeping bags. Spiders didn't really bother me. They were kind of up here and I was down here a couple feet away. I had a jumping mouse visit me every night for a while. That was kind of weird and cool and great. But the best sleeps and the most vivid dreams I ever had were in that shelter. To this day, I can say the same, and that was like 10 years ago. So anyways, I lived in that shelter. I crawled out of there in November with a foot of snow on it, and, you know, and I left. Well, a changed person forever, you know. So that was my shelter experience. And the shelter gave me the kick and the inspiration to go build my own cabin. So I'm going to be posting the video here on the screen so you can watch that. My friend Matt did a video on that you can check out. So I bought a piece of land less than a year later that finished, and I moved into my canvas tent on the land and I started cutting trees, and I got a really good guy in town to help me that was nearby, and he was a framer, and you know, he never done a log cabin, but I was the guy doing the bulwark. He did some too, of course, but then he was the brains and he helped me figure it all out, and we kind of pecked away at it. Though I was there for 5 years after we started. So we got this thing done. We cut the balsam fir down, and I peeled all the bark. No machinery was used. I didn't have an ATV even. It was just like legs and hands and arms. And yeah, got it done. The hardest logs were up top. We did have some people in the area come out for that, putting those big logs up there. Some big burly guys helped out with that part. But yeah, we got it done. And you know, about a year later, I was in my tent the whole time while this was being built. So I was living in my tent. And right when the roof was on and a wood stove was in there, I moved in. And then for the next 4 years, I lived in there and I pecked away at it. And gradually it became to what you're seeing now in the pictures, like a really beautiful place. I put so much time into it. I didn't realize that once you build a cabin, the real work begins once the roof is on. I had to do all the chinking. I had to, you know, I put some flooring in there. I had to build a counter and, you know, build a bathroom in there. For 4 years, I didn't have a fridge. I had to gradually get that. I had to set up the solar panels. I had to get a compost toilet because, you know, when I was in my tent, I was like using cat holes, digging and going on the fly. And then I got a sawdust bucket, and then I got a compost toilet proper eventually. So all these things, like, I didn't have the money at the time, so I just like one piece at a time, you know, did it, and eventually it became a really beautiful spot. And the reason I'm not there now is I sold it about 3 years ago. I made a video about this as well, the realities of living in, you know, remote areas. I was the victim of a robbery. I hired these guys to help, and then I got robbed, and anyways, it's very vigilante justice up there. I didn't do anything wrong. I was just kind of a prey to people who had power in this area because they had shady connections through family and all over the, you know, all that sort of stuff. And that's what you walk into if you go to a remote area. FYI, pro tip, is that you walk into a community that's already very tight-knit, set up, and you have no power there. And there's not really any cops around, so people just get away with everything. That's just the reality of it. So I sold the cabin, and brings me to my next thing, moved into my van. I'll post a van tour video up here so you can see that if you want. The verdict on van life for me is van life is awful. I would never do it again. I spent like 2 long seasons in my van. Yeah, it sounds great. It's a great idea. You're fancy free, you're on the move. You can make it cozy in there, but overall I didn't sleep very well. And it was a lot of parking lots, and it was just so uncomfortable. I didn't have a very, very big van. It was a Chevy Astro van. I did have some really cool camping experiences, but I would have rather just used a tent and not a van, you know, all said and done. So I did the van life thing. I made a bunch of videos on that while I was living it. It's on my other channel, but anyways, van life. And then during the winters, lived in a couple other cabins. You got to check some of these cabins out. They're very cool. The first one was my buddy Pat's cabin. I stayed there and helped him out on his property for like a couple months. So spoiler alert too, the way he built this cabin is the way I'm going to build my house. Square logs that are grooved. It's still wood, it's still logs. I know the guy who's going to cut them, and it's very easy to build. I don't care to be a red seal carpenter ever. I just want to build a house for a million different reasons. But I don't want it to be my life's you know, journey all of a sudden. I got other stuff I'm doing. I just want to build a house. Me and my buddy can do it because the cabin you're seeing here, he built it and he built a house in the same sort of way. So the two of us can do it. So anyways, this cabin is built with 8 by 8 logs, all squared, milled locally, grooved, easy to put together. Has the overhanging loft, as you can see, and that's where the bed was inside. And a cute little wood stove, and it was like 10 by 10 or 10 by 12 inside, 9 by 11, one of those dimensions. Really tiny, but it had enough for a staircase inside to get to the top. And the top felt nice and big because of the extra overhang. It was a sweet spot. So I stayed there for a few months. And then I moved to another cabin, which this one was far, far, far more rustic. It was built from reclaimed wood. There was gaps around the windows. Very cold winter. I stayed there all winter. A really old wood stove. It was really cool looking, but it was very old and it didn't work very well. Yeah, it wasn't the same quality of build, but I had to stay there because I knew the guy who owned it, and he helped me record my album. So I stayed there while I recorded the album with him, and that was my home base. I got there and I was like, oh, do you have any firewood? No, you can buy some around though. I couldn't find any firewood. I had to cut it on the fly. And that was kind of brutal because a lot of that wood that was standing was still sort of wet, even though it was dead. A lot of wet pine and spruce. I found one really good tree I cut down and I had to haul it all. There was no ATVs. I had to just, hand bomb it up the hill. It was a rustic time. And then, outhouse all winter, like without fail, -30. It was what it was. But anyways, it was a really cool spot. You're seeing all the pictures now. It was a 9x11 and had the overhang loft as well for sleeping in. The difference is you couldn't stand up in this one. I could stand up in my buddy Pat's cabin. This one, you was a crawl space. You had to get up there and crawl. With my own cabin, I had a very tall loft, which I could stand up in easily. Even though there was a ladder to get up there, I could stand up in there no problem. That is key if you're building a cabin. You want a loft you can stand in. Just do it. Life is so much better. I know from a lot of experience. You'll sleep better, you'll live better, all that stuff. Another thing you want to do is take your time building it because you want to get it airtight so that the heat stays in and the cold, the bugs stay out. And cover all the spaces so the squirrels stay out of there too. I had a squirrel problem in the cabin I'm showing you right now. So, all kinds of little things, but the overhang is great, and an airtight wood stove is like ideal if you can do it. So that is my story of living the last 10 years, and now you've seen me here in my studio. I've taken a job recently working on expedition cruises, and so my summers have largely been spent up in the Arctic, along the Labrador coast in Canada, Greenland, and I'll be doing that again this summer, off and on, hopefully with some land and a build on the go. Stay tuned. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed my story time. Gotta love it. And I will see you at the next one, folks. Cheers.